This talk is going to be about a series of poems called the 陪郑广文游何将军山林. Visit in the mountain grove of General He in the company of Instructor Zhang. So a very exciting title, of course, and I'm sure you're stoked to find out what this is all about. It so happened that I looked back on all the Dufu videos that I've made, and it turns out that I haven't made a lot of videos about his 律诗, that is his poems in the 8-line regulated format, which he is the most famous for mastering to perfection. And, well, I thought I would remedy that by taking a series of poems, a group of 10, which is also from the early part of his career, and talk a little bit more in detail about these ones. Actually, I'm not going to go through the whole text of all of these 10 poems because, well, it's going to be quite a lot of lines then, but I will choose 6 of them. So that's at least a majority of them. And the reason I do that is also because they hang together really as a unit, even though all of these 10 poems are, they are independent works of art, you might say, in a sense. I mean, they're all finished poems, but the whole series is a work in itself. So it makes sense to read at least most of them in connection to each other and sort of to get a sense of how they form an artistic unity. So let's just get right to it. I'll just start by introducing like the dramatis personae here. We have Dufu, of course, who is our narrator, and Zheng Guangwen, Instructor Zheng. This is a guy called Zheng Qian, and this is a friend of Dufu. He's called Zheng Guangwen here, and Stephen Owen translates as Instructor Zheng. The reason he's called Guangwen is because he worked for a place called the Guangwen Guan, which was, you might say, an institution of higher learning under the Imperial University in the Tang Dynasty, and he worked for this. So he's called here Zheng Guangwen. So he's together with Zheng Guangwen, and they go to a place which is owned by a certain General He. We don't know who this General He is. And his Shanlin, the mountain grove, well, Shanlin here, it does seem as if in this place they're going to, this park or whatever it is, that there are both mountains and forests, but I think this word should be taken to refer to his park or his estate in some kind of more general sense. We know that this is an estate close to Tangshan, and Shanlin probably is sort of a little bit of a romanticized idea about, you could just go to out in the countryside and you're in the wilderness basically. Well, in actual fact, I think it seems like they're in a kind of park-like enclosure, so it's probably not an entirely natural area. But it is anyway owned by the He Jiangjun, who has invited Dufu and his friend Mr. Zheng to go and visit him. And Dufu writes a series of 10 poems, and as I said, they're a kind of unity. And I'll start with the first one. And okay, in this, of course, I've changed my mind from how I usually do this, and when I put up the couplets one by one. In this case, I choose to do the single poems one by one, because there will be so many couplets otherwise. So this is the first one, and it serves as an introduction to the whole series. But I'll be as detailed as I'm always, so don't worry about that, and I'm sure this will be a quite long video. 不识南塘路，今至第五桥。名园依绿水，野竹上清宵。谷口旧相得，豪梁同见朝。 平生未忧幸，未息马蹄遥。If we start with the first couplet here, 南塘路, the South Basin, 南塘 and 第五桥, Bridge 5 and South Basin, these are evidently place names and they're appropriately capitalized here by Stephen Owen. It sounds like the couplet merely sort of divides up rhetorically what is really one single location. So, I didn't know the way to South Basin and Bridge 5, but now I know them. Now I know where they are. So, this is the first time he comes, basically. That's the only thing that this first two lines say. The Mingyuan, the famous garden, yes, is this Shanlin that they're going to. I think this couplet probably needs no explanation language-wise, but I think it's just a very nice couplet. And these poems are all very nice. They're all very nice and have high poetic quality, even though they're not about any sort of really lofty themes or anything. But they're very, very nice and very nicely crafted, very expertly crafted. I think 明园一绿水，野竹上清宵. It just rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? It's so natural. It almost doesn't sound like a poetic expression, but it is, obviously, and it's a perfect parallelism, and it's just super nice. It's very, very nice. 谷口就香得好两同见招. Here is something that we can go into a bit at least. These are allusions, and we have the allusions to older literature, and that's why we have these. There's a valley mouth is a long-time friend, and so on in the translation, which looks quite strange by itself. But so Guko, this is an old allusion to this. I've talked about this in another video, I think, where it also referred to a guy named Zhang, with the surname Zheng. This is the old allusion to a man called Zheng Pu, I think, Zheng Pu, who was this virtuous man who lived in his valley, in the mouth of a valley, and who refused to leave it, even when summoned to court by the emperor, even though he was known for his worthiness, and so on. So this is an allusion to a person who prefers to live in a nice, secluded environment without really any worldly ambitions. And because that man was also named Zheng, here this stands in for his friend who brings him to see General He. So Guko, I think Stephen Owen understands it as simply referring to Mr. Zheng, and I think he's right about that. Guko 就相得, I know Valleymouth from long before, and now we're 同见招. Now we're both invited. We're both summoned to Haoliang, the bridge on the Hao. Jian is an interesting character. This is something that you might not know, but in classical Chinese, this Jian, the verb after it always refers to it's always in the passive sense and refers to the writer himself, no matter what kind of construction it is in. So I am being summoned together with him to the bridge on the Hao. Haoliang is also a classical allusion. It refers to the Zhuangzi. It comes from the Zhuangzi. It's the famous story about the joy of the fish, Yu Zhile, where Zhuangzi stands with his friend and co-debater Huizi on the bridge of the river Hao, and they see the fish there, and one of them says, this is the joy of the fish, and the other one says, how do you know that? And so on and so forth. This is also, both of these allusions really, they really lend themselves to creating this air of, what we're going to be experiencing here is, appreciation of natural beauty and being at peace with one's surroundings and so forth. So it sets the stage for a nice sort of weekend trip, which I think really is perhaps what they were doing here. This might have been like a weekend trip or so. 平生为幽幸, for the elation in secluded spots. Yeah, here we have this term, 幽幸. 幽幸, this is really something that goes through this whole series. Sorry, this goes through this whole series of poems. The secluded or deep private interest and joy in beautiful and secluded spots. That is basically what 幽性 means. And he says here that he has always been a fan of, he has always been a person who appreciates this to the degree, you know, that he's never bothered about how far he has to travel to go there. 为西马蹄遥. It sounds here, I mean, my association is to this, that it sounds like he probably has to run around a lot, you know, at this point in his life, you know, he has traveled a lot, but at least for 幽性, you know, it's worth it. 马蹄遥 is sort of his life, and he frequently does begrudge it, as Owen says, but, you know, not if it's for 幽性. So it's also nice, this poem, I think with the last couplet, he sort of 平生, he puts it all my life here, he sort of very discreetly turns sort of this into a statement about himself, you know, and the kind of life that he lives. So this is the introduction, and I don't think it's one of the more remarkable poems of the whole series, but I think I chose to put it in here anyway because it's an introduction, so we get the whole sense of the complete journey here. I skip over poem 2, which is about some trees, and we go straight to number 3 instead. 万里荣王子，何年别月枝？一花开绝域，滋满杂青池。汉时途空道，神农竟不知。陆翻兼雨打，开拆见离披。These rhymes sound kind of awkward in modern Mandarin. We have 知, 池, 知, well, that's nice, and then 批. Presumably all of these ended with some kind of I sound in Du Fu's days. So this is about some kind of flower, which doesn't really, which you don't really understand when you start reading. 万里荣王子, the Rong prince, you know, barbarian prince, or, you know, prince of the Western kingdoms from thousands of leagues away, you know. When did you leave the 月枝? And then we realize later, you know, that what he's talking about, he's addressing a prince, he's addressing a flower as a prince. So this 荣王子, why is he calling a flower Rong prince? Well, from this poem, when we look at all of it, it is clear that this isn't a Chinese flower, it's a species that has been brought from Central Asia. And he asked, when did it leave the 月枝? The 月枝, I don't think this 月枝 here refers to anything specific, you know, it's just the name of a kingdom far away in the west. But actually the 月枝, I think that's an interesting people. They're usually considered to be Indo-Europeans. Perhaps they were related to the Tocharians, or they were the Tocharians. That is the easternmost branch of the Indo-European family, basically. And the Yuezhi, they later formed the Kushan Empire, which was a Central Asian empire that stretched all the way down to India in the sort of 1st to 4th century. I said later now, but it was earlier than Du Fu's time at least. But Yuezhi here it just means basically, you know, a place far away. 一花开绝域, yeah. So 一花, the strange flower, is a strange flower, as in a stranger. Yeah, different flower, which blooms in remote lands. Owen says, yes, very remote regions in the land of the Yuezhi, perhaps. 滋满, lush creepers, like yes, profuse creepers, make the circuit. 杂 is translated as making the circuit. This is an unusual character. Yes, it means to surround on all sides. So make a circuit is a nice translation. It's not an especially common word, so you're sort of hit by the strangeness of it a little bit. But Du Fu is presumably not disappointed with the you here when his interest in secluded spots when he finds something like this, Anyway, the Han envoy reached there for nothing. 汉时图空道，神农竟不知. This Han envoy, 汉时, presumably this has to refer to people like Zhang Qian and the other people who first went to the western regions to discover and to conquer as well. Here, Du Fu says that he reached there for nothing. Well, how so then? Well, because he didn't see this flower and he didn't bring it back, No one still knows about it, and Du Fu has never seen a flower like this or never heard of it. So that was a wasted trip for Zhang Qian if he didn't see this flower. Shen Nong Jing Bu Zhi. Shen Nong is literally the divine farmer. As you perhaps know, this is the name of a mythical emperor who is sort of a culture hero figure. He was the one who taught the Chinese people to farm. And he was also famous for having tasted every plant to find out if it was poisonous or edible. And his name is associated with a tradition of herbal medicine. So there was, for example, a text which is now lost that was called the Shen Nong Ben Cao, which was a work of herbal medicine. And he didn't even know of it. The Emperor Shen Nong never knew of this plant. It's very, very it's very different, it's very strange. So we have to hear in this couplet, of course, we have to hear great admiration for the flower. These explorer figures, which both Zhang Qian and Shen Nong were, they didn't find this flower. They were unaware of its beauty. And I should also perhaps point out, which was also in a footnote by Stephen Owen, the fact that so many critics remark on this. Tu Kong. They mean the same thing, right? In vain, emptily. So, is this a stylistic flaw? To use two words when you could only use one because they mean the same thing? Well, perhaps there is, perhaps it isn't. 汉是图空道. It actually made me stop and think a bit. Does he mean something else about with any of these words? But I think it is. He just uses 图空 instead of any single one of them. So at least it's quite an unusual usage, especially in the Lü Shi format, which is usually so about being very pregnant and concentrated in expression. We don't waste words in a line of Lü Shi, especially not in a 5-line Lü Shi as this is. But anyway, Du Fu does this in this place, and 陆番间鱼打 开柴见梨皮. It sounds as if he discovers this flower in perhaps something else than the best of its bloom, as it has already been a little bit, it's bloomed for a while, and it's already been sort of, the dew has fallen on it many times, and it has been battered by rain, and it kai chai. He even says kai chai. I think this sounds very drastic, to talk about a flower, and it's also actually a double, like tu kong. These two mean the same thing. It's like split open, right? And as it splits open, it becomes more and more gradually li pi. This is a kind of an old 2-character phrase. We find it in the Chu Ci, referring to exactly this: plants. They look on plants when they lose their leaves and so on. So this li pi, sort of a bit scattered, half withered perhaps. And I think this poem, all of it in general, it's kind of funny because it's a little bit like a riddle. You read it for the first time, it's like, what is he actually talking about? Yeah, of course, when you look at this line and this line, it's like, okay, it's about a flower. But the whole expression with these 图空道 and 开柴见里皮, it's almost like prose, it's very prosy, like even though in the beginning, 万里戎王子何年别月之, but then when you look at it, even though it sounds so prosy and a bit talky almost, the parallelism is there, it's very rigorous, it follows all the rules of 律诗. So that's also the magnificence of Du Fu's art, is to sort of make the 律诗 into something a little bit different every time. We go on, this was number 3. Let's talk about number 4 as well. 旁射帘高主，疏篱带晚花。念窝深墨马，藤蔓驱藏舍。慈父公无益，山林既未赊。近拈书几脉，来问尔东家。So here he talks about neighboring cottages, 旁舍. The neighbor, and he talks cottages, 旁舍. Cottages, 舍 perhaps refers to smaller buildings rather than bigger ones, but it's not entirely clear if this is just cottages, farmers or anything else living in the vicinity, or if we're talking about another large estate, because as I just said, we have the whole garden that they're in is called Shanlin, which I think is sort of a not a euphemism, but it's a sort of a romantic name for what is really a country estate. It's not just a part of nature. So perhaps in the same vein, he talks about the neighboring estate as if it was just some cottages, 旁舍, the little houses on the side. Anyway, they are in the close vicinity and connection to tall bamboo, 疏篱带晚花. Here, this 疏, this is this 疏. This character usually looks a bit different, doesn't it? Sparse. You probably know which character I mean. This is what it looks like in my edition, so I just took care to put in this 一体字, this alternative form of an established and rather common character. But I had to look this up when I saw it first because I wasn't sure that it was the same. But is this the same as the 疏, which means sparse or spaced out a little bit, as in 疏篱, for example? This is the hedge, presumably then, of the 旁舍, and in it has late flowers. Late, then I think late as in blooming late in the season, probably. As I said, this is probably, when you look at all of these poems together, it seems that this is late spring or early summer. So these are late flowers in that sense. The season for flowers has already sort of passed, but there are some late flowers still visible. Then there's this couplet. This line almost defeated me at first. 碾窝深墨马, the millstone whirlpool. It's not really even very comprehensible in English. What is 碾窝? I had to Google this. I Googled this 碾, it means millstone, yes. If you Google 水碾, like water mill in Chinese, you find a splendid illustration exactly what a millstone whirlpool refers to. So you have to imagine like a mill, a building, sort of a mill, and inside it there's a millstone, and this is run This is powered by water. So there's an arrangement like with a stick down into the water, which powers the millstone. And when this whole arrangement, sort of this whole mechanism is pulled by the water, it spins round and round, and it causes a whirlpool. So then I understood. Okay, so there is a kind of brook or something like this, and there's a millstone, a water mill on it, and therefore there's a millstone whirlpool as well. 漣涡. And it's so deep. Presumably, this is exactly as the translation says, is deep enough to sink a horse. There's not a horse drowning in it at the moment. It's same with this one. Tang man, rattan vines. It's not that there are snakes in them right now, but they're so gnarled and twisted that they could easily be snakes camouflaged inside there. Then he starts off with, he's in such admiration of this charming situation that he starts lamenting, his own choices in life, basically. 慈父公无益. My skill in poetic expositions bring no gain. 山林既未奢. My tracks in mountain forests are not far in the future. I'm not sure that this is correct, actually. We have a rather difficult word here. 奢. This is fairly odd, because it originally means to owe, in the economic sense, in the financial sense. And then it has a secondary meaning, which is far or deep, which is in this situation. But here Owen understands is that not far in the future. My understanding is that, he says that, okay, on the one hand, I'm trying my best, to make my way in the world through my literary abilities. And this was the time of his year when he tried to, I haven't talked much about this, but when he tried to get the emperor's attention through his poetic works and whatever, and that didn't work out so well. So that was one thing, that he tried that, but he didn't really succeed. On the other hand, he had his sort of other ambition, or a lack of ambition, which is basically the opposite of that, just to just abandon all these ambitions and go into the forest and be a hermit, which is perhaps the only honorable thing to do in a stupid world as this. And that was his other little alternative, but he hasn't really accomplished anything on that way either. He's 山林既未奢. He hasn't got far on that path either. So he stands here sort of choosing between both of these alternatives, and because he is in this wonderful Shanling environment, he's clearly pushed to this side. And in the last couplet here, he just said, I should just grab all my books and sell them. And then 来问尔东家. Come to call on the home in your east. Yeah, let's look at the language here. Here we have 今年, yeah, grab. This sounds quite colloquial, I think. The whole thing, this whole last couplet. 来今年书锦卖来问尔东家. When would then be like to call on or just turn towards. In my edition, there's a long note about the sort of meaning about 东家. I won't go into that. I think Stephen Owen, actually, in the translation, has a useful note here where he says that this R probably refers to the neighbor of the general He. So your because he's talking here about the neighboring cottages, right? That's sort of the theme of the whole poem. And then you is sort of the whole situation that you're in, and Dongja, the guy to your east, well, that would then be actually the general who is visiting, I'll just grab my books, sell them, and I'll have enough money to come and live, as a hermit on the estate of General He, something like that. Because anyway, I'm good for nothing except for writing poems. But yeah, you're really good at that at least, and you're a legend in our eyes. So don't worry. Okay, we go to number 5 instead. This is a really good one, I think. 盛水沧江破，残山皆始开。绿垂风折损，红战雨飞梅。银甲谈征用，金鱼换酒来。杏夷无洒扫，随意作梅胎。This is a couplet to scratch your head at, isn't it? 盛水沧江破，残山皆始开。I'm a little bit doubtful about Owen's translation here, but let's go into it and start with the easy stuff at least. We have Tangjiang, sort of river water, and then we have Jieshi, which is a mountain in Hebei. So a large river and a large mountain here. And on the one it says po and the other says kai, so these are the verbs of the mountain. Then we have these little puzzling things, sheng shui and Tangshan. What does this actually refer to? I think that this sheng shui and Tangshan grammatically probably function as attributes to these two. So as a remnant of water. I don't know why Owen says surplus here, because sheng so obviously means to be a remnant, a remnant of water, like a remnant of the Tangjiang, like a remnant of water. The Tangjiang is broken, used up. I don't know what to make of this translation, actually. Owen also admits his puzzlement at this, and then he says that po has a colloquial sense of being used up. I can't find this in a dictionary, so I don't know where he gets this from, but perhaps he's right about that. But I think it makes more sense to sort of think of it as the river banks can be broken and it can flow over, and then it can sort of create a remnant of water, something like that. And here we have Tangshan, sort of, it's the same meaning as sheng, of course. Tangshan, a remnant of mountain, the Ji-rock appears. The funny thing about this is obviously that the sheng shui, it sounds very small, and Tangshan also sounds quite small, but Tangjiang and Jieshi are clearly, meant to suggest quite large and vast forms of nature. So what he sees before him is probably something that is really very small, but has something about them that creates the association to these great natural shapes. And we know, of course, that is an ideal of Chinese garden design, to have things that remind you of the greatness of nature in a very small space. But another possibility, I think, perhaps, is that because it seems like we are in a general situation where there is water, perhaps a large sort of river or a minor brook or anything like that. So, and it perhaps has perhaps it sort of divides up in various channels and everything, and when you get to the end of it, you're sort of at the sheng shui, the sort of the last little bit of water, and still it gives the impression as if a great river had broken out here, something like that. And as well, it could also be that we are in a place where there are mountains nearby, but or hills at least, but when you get to this point, they are sort of small and insignificant, but just in this place where they still give the impression of being a jieshi when they sort of appear or open up. So this is a very condensed and something really to bang your head at. So, this is the interpretation I can give to it. So let's go on, and because the weirdness doesn't stop here, because Du Fu is really on a roll in this one. It's so suggestive, it's so expressive, this poem. I think it's amazing. 绿垂风折损，红绽羽飞眉. You know, look at Owen's translation here. Green dangling wind-snapped bamboo shoots. He reads the whole line as, you know, as if all of this, 绿垂风折, was an attribute to the last one. And the same here, you know, 红绽羽飞 is the attribute of the mei here. I think this may be correct, you know, but it's a very remarkable syntax for a Chinese poem. It's even extreme, actually, you know. But it could perhaps also be read as, you know, active sentences where 风 and 雨 are the subjects, and then 折 and 飞 are active verbs. So, you know, green dangling in creating the green dangling, the wind snap the bamboo shoots, and, you know, making them split up red. The rain fattens the plums. You know, it's so hard to translate this, but you know, I'm just trying to give you a sense of like how these words hang together in the Chinese text. What is the preferred reading? You know, I think they both work, but that is also the miracle of this, because he's really piling just words on them, words in a line, and it creates this really dense image. You know, you understand exactly what he's trying to convey, even though the syntax is so loose and ambiguous. It's very expressionistic. It's quite amazing. And together with, you know, these two lines, and you have this as the first four, you just, wow, what is happening here? You know, this is unlike most poetry that you read in ancient Chinese, I would say. Then it gets progressively easier as we go from there. 银甲弹筝用，金鱼换酒来. This 银甲 is silver scales. Yeah, I mean, at first you would think silver nails, because it says 弹筝. 筝, of course, being, you know, the 古筝, the musical instrument, which was a very popular instrument in the Tang Dynasty, by the way. But I don't think he actually talks about these plectrums that you put on your fingers to play this instrument. I think he's talking about he's using scales or something from General He's armor, which is also pointed out by Stephen Owen, that because otherwise the parallelism doesn't make sense. Why? I'll go into it. So 金鱼, that's a badge of office, actually. Which was so specifically actually of high officials, which was used in the Tang. So the golden fish exchange for ale. I take my badge of office and I exchange it for something to drink, and I take my military armor and I use it to play music. You know, we're just that. Then the parallelism makes sense, and the sense of the poem, you know, comes through. You know, we're really taking some time off here from our official duties. Not that Du Fu had any at this point, but you know, the General He being the guest, that's what he does to them. And 信宜无扫扫, when the impulse shifts elsewhere, don't sweep it clear. Yeah, you know, there's no time to sweep when the impulse shifts. Huh? So the drinking has started here, we understand that. And there's just sitting, now they're sitting here, now they're sitting there, and they're sitting on moss everywhere. You know, actually the drinking here, I said the drinking has started. Perhaps this explains Du Fu's confused syntax in this poem. One thing that I reflected over a little bit, which of course reflects my lack of understanding of Chinese vocabulary, was this mei. Because I thought that mei meant berry. And 梅苔, the berry moss, well, actually, it just means moss, at least in connection with 苔. So when used like this, it's just moss, 梅苔. Well, you learn something every day. We'll go on. I skip over the 6th one, which is about a waterfall and when they wake up from the first bout of drinking. We'll go on to this one instead. 鸡树寒云色，阴沉春藕香。翠天生菜美，阴翳食单凉。野鹤清晨出，山精白日藏。石林攀水阜，百里独苍苍。This is a little bit more normal, but it's still very, very nicely crafted. He's basically, just goes on to describe the situation in another part of the garden, and it looks like they're eating again. So where are they? They are where there grows some jujube trees, 橘树. This is something also that I was thinking about for the first time, actually, now. Jujube tree, if that's how it's pronounced in English. This is called 枣树, actually, in Chinese, isn't it? 枣树. And the 枣, this character, this was the first time I realized this, is actually the same as this one. It's just this half of this character, they just put on top of each other instead of next to each other, as in this. So this ji character, does this also mean jujube? The answer is yes, it actually does. It's just another kind of jujube. I didn't know this, So the ji shu, the jujube tree, have the color of cold clouds. Do cold clouds have a certain color? Perhaps they do. Yinchen artemisia, scent of spring lotus. Yinchen, this is some kind of grass, and it's said to have its name from yin chen. If you take away the grass radicals here, you're left with yin chen, because of the old, or from the old, because this plant is said to grow in the spring from the remains of last autumn. I don't know if this is a folk etymology or if it's actually that is the reason why the plant sounds like this. And it can be eaten, apparently. And that's the scent of spring lotus. 翠天生菜美. 生菜 is actually the same as in modern Chinese. It's lettuce. And the name is because it was eaten raw, even in the Tang Dynasty, which is quite uncommon in modern China, funnily enough, where, raw vegetables are usually avoided. But the lettuce was apparently eaten raw in Tang China. And the cui here is presumably the cui of the yinchen. The yinchen is brittle or crispy, and its crispiness makes the lettuce even better. So it's crispy and with some more crispy on. Culinary enjoyment at its best. 阴翳食单凉. 食单 is like their picnic blanket, basically. And the yin, referring then probably to the shade of the jujube tree, makes the picnic blanket even more even cooler and nicer. This is a nice couplet, isn't it? 野鹤清晨出，山精百日藏. Doesn't need much explanation, really. 山精 is some kind of mountain monster or being This one hides in daylight, 白日藏. So probably Du Fu doesn't see it hiding, but the place has this kind of aura, so it's as if they should be living in a place like that. Again, this is this you, the secluded spots. And crane, of course, is a good, auspicious bird. So we have a very, very pretty surroundings, basically. The last line, 石林潘水府，百里独苍苍. Shilin, a forest of trees, probably very narrow. No, a forest of stones. So they're probably very narrowly spaced. And pan, coiled round, it probably means exactly the same as ta did in the second poem I talked about, like surround. Even though, of course, here pan, the original meaning of it is to coil like a snake. 水府 is nice. A place where the element water has its mansion, So presumably a pond or something like that. Anywhere where water collects can be the 水府, watery precincts. 百里独苍苍. Tangshan, grey green, Owen says, yeah, dark green, something like that. 百里 is some obviously hyperbole. The Shilin, the forests of stone, and the water here is not 100 li large, but perhaps the stones are very high or something like that. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I will end this long discussion on this series of poems by skipping over poems number 8 and 9 and go straight to the 10th and final. So we can round off the whole series in the same way as we started. Now Du Fu has to leave, and he's very sad about that. 忧意忽不切，归期无奈何。出门流水住，回首白云多。自笑灯前舞，谁怜最后歌？只因与朋好，风雨亦来过。I wanted to read this character 过 here as 过. This is something I have to consult experts about. But this character 过 has the falling tone in Mandarin, which usually means that in Middle Chinese, that is the Chinese of Du Fu's period, it did not have the required level tone, the ping tone, which is required for a rhyme in the Lü Shi. As we know, the Lü Shi always rhymes on either Mandarin tone 1 or 2. So I don't know if this actually was pronounced guo in this specific significance as the character has here, because it means to stop by, as far as I understand here. Yeah, well, perhaps it is pronounced guo. Perhaps Du Fu breaks the rules here, or perhaps the transformations, the sound changes of this character don't follow the general pattern. I don't know about that. Anyway, let's go and look at the actual words here of the text. We have, again, 忧意, thoughts of seclusion. I think it's more than just seclusion. It is it is the outer seclusion, but it also refers to, the fact that his thoughts, his feelings here are very private and sort of, in a sense, impossible to communicate to other people. And this 忧意, thoughts of seclusion and secluded thoughts, and his very private inner thoughts, they are suddenly disturbed. Suddenly he's not happy. 切 means happy or satisfied. Why is he not happy then? Because they have to leave. 归期, the time to come back has come, and that cannot be helped. He exits the gate, 出门, the gates of the estate, obviously. 出门流水住，回首白云多. Let's look at this. What actually happens here? 流水住, the flowing waters stop. Well, that's an impossibility, isn't it? if there is flowing water outside his gate, it can't just suddenly stop, does it? I mean, it's always surreal, right? So how are we to understand this? I think it's probably like the feeling of unreality. You know? It's an unreal feeling that hits him when he realizes he's sort of back in the normal world, and suddenly everything freezes, and he stands there, and it seems as if the water, or the very water of the river before him, or the channel before him, just has stopped, and he looks around back, and the only thing he can see is white clouds, you know. All the things he has experienced as a guest in General He's estate, they're suddenly just like clouds, and he thinks back on what actually happens, and he laughs at himself. 自笑灯前舞, dancing before the lamp. You know, this refers to stuff that happened when he was drunk the other night, because the poems I skipped over, 8 and 9, they're basically mostly about them drinking. So, and who cares, you know, of the poems one makes when drunk? 谁怜? Who loves, yeah, who loves or who cares about, and who pities, you know, who pities them, you know, he pities himself. Poor Dufu. He feels he is probably hungover and unhappy at this point. So the only thing he can do is perhaps to look forward to next time they come here. 知音与朋好. Peng Hao, it could be my friend or his friends. Of course, Chinese doesn't distinguish between the plural and the singular. I'm coming back, you know. General He, I'm coming back, you know, even if it rains. 风雨, wind and rain, I will come back. In any case. So that is all of the 6 of the 10 poems in this series. I don't know if there's a good way to summarize all of them. And you know, we look at them and we see here his tremendous ability to vary the poetic expression within the Lü Shi form, and to create a sense. You know, it's not monolithic in that sense. You know, they all follow the same form, but he makes sure to both thematically and stylistically to put in these nice little touches that distinguish these poems from one another, which is very interesting in itself. And I think the prevailing mood here is actually, you know, well, he admires the garden and he has a very good time, but he's quite melancholy here, I think. You know, from the first poem, there are notes of dissatisfaction, and in the last poem here, he seems almost morose, you know. And I think at this point in his life, he was probably not generally so happy with himself. He, you know, is 自笑, like, look, I laughed and said, who cares about me, you know. And we'll go back and look here at, where is it? 慈父公无益, you know. My poetic career goes nowhere, you know, and I should just go deeper into the forests and just keep to myself and everything like this. So I think I sense a note of general dissatisfaction with the situation, even though he takes care to describe all the positive effects on mood and poetic inspiration that the plays gives him. And I think the whole series is like you really get a sense of it being a nice journey, which it is. So I think that's all we can say, or all I'm going to say, at least at this point, about this fantastic little series, 陪郑广文游何将军山林. Thank you for listening to this long exposition, and see you again next time.